All right, so last Friday we did a little personal job on our 1998 Honda CRV. We put a lift kit into lift kit spacers. You can see those spacers there on the back of our CRV to space the rear wheel or lift the car 2.5 inches. The backs on these things typically sag after time. And I drove it around for, I don't know, a few days and liked it, the way it rode. Stella approved. It didn't seem to change, the gear ratio, the top heaviness, the suspension bottoming out, no weird rattles, no weird shakes. The brake lines are not stretched. There's no safety concerns. So now we're going to do the fronts. So I'm getting ready here to actually pull the whole shock out. I think I've got to trim something on the top. I've got to undo this fork, pull the whole thing out, put it in a vise and trim some stuff so I can put this spacer in. Oh, in fact, in the instructions here, it shows you I've got to trim these little areas here that are in the red to make it fit. So I've got to pull the shock strut assembly out, put the spacer on top to give the front of the car a 1.5 inch lift. So let's get working on that and see how we like it. I think I'm going to like it just fine. All right, I see what you got to do here. Once you get the shock out of the CRV and get into a vise, you've got to trim these bolts a little bit. When you put the spacer on like this, see how the bolts stick up? You got to be able to get new bolts through the top here with nuts, so you need to take about 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch off these. So we're just going to zip those real quick and see if we can make this work. All right, so we took our trusty cutoff wheel and we chopped the top of our studs here, and then we took a die, cleaned up the threads, put our nuts on, and then put our bolts in. They can't come out. And then we'll put this back into the car. This gets bolted up to the top of the shock tower, and the bottom goes here to the fork, which is down there on the ground. And we have to monkey it into place because we're stretching the suspension a little bit, but not too far, only 1.5 inches. One thing I forgot to mention is you can't get enough suspension droop to put the new shock in with the spacer on top. I think the spacer's way up there. So you got to disconnect the ball joint. I like using this ball joint press tool because you don't rip the boot. So you've got to disconnect the upper ball joint to allow the suspension to hang more so that you can get the effective longer shock in its place. So I just did that. All right, so a couple more tips for you here to make it a little easier. You can use your handy dandy floor jack to compress your suspension to put it all back together. Don't forget your cotter pin on your ball joint. And I actually loosened my ABS wires here because when this was drooping down, it was pulling on there. So you can just loosen the bracket there on the body. It all seems to fit tight. The spring is pretty close to the body, but once we get the weight of the vehicle, it'll pull away a little bit. You can't put any more of a spacer in it than the 1.5 inch without doing some subframe spacers as well. So, all right, let's continue the other side and get our wheels back on and drive around. All right, so we've got our lift kit installed on our 1998 Honda CRV. I just finished up the fronts. It leveled out the car nicely. Sits up pretty high. So this is the basic lift kit made by HRG. It was approximately $164 for the spacers plus my time. The front got lifted 1.5 inches and the rear 2.5. And pretty happy with that. Anybody else happy? Anyhow, when we load this thing up to go skiing in a couple months, it won't sag in the back and we'll have a little bit more ground clearance to cover the ground. If there's snow, we'll be able to traverse over it a little better. And just kind of gives a little bit better point of view while driving around. So I think this is a wrap. I like the lift. Got to get used to it. I got to check for any alignment issues or any squeaking or rubbing. I don't think so. Everything seems to fit pretty good. All right, thanks for watching, and thanks for watching me lift up this little CRV.